Next, from Springfield, Lennie Jarratt, the project manager for the Center for Transforming Education at the Heartland Institute. This runs about 15 minutes.
Lennie Jarratt, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel. You are with the Heartland Institute. We're here at the state capitol, and we're here surprisingly on a day when the House of Representatives is in the middle of August, which is normally not the case. They're going to be looking at SB 1, the education funding reform, that as we take this, the Senate just overrode the governor's veto of that bill. On the question of education, you at the Heartland Institute have a little bit of a different take, and what can you tell us about it and why you think that this will be a positive thing for students in Illinois?
Well, Heartland's been around for 34 years, and one of their main issues has always been educational choice. And our feeling at the Heartland is the more competition you can bring to education, the better you can meet the needs of children. Every children learns differently, they study differently, how they work. And so if you can provide them with an option instead of a one-size-fits-all system, that each one can find the educational needs that fit them personally.
And the way you're, one of the things that we wanted to talk about is the use of people making donations and taking tax credits so that there are scholarships privately funded.
Right, correct. Right, tax credit scholarships are private funds. So individuals, and I'm not sure about Illinois, the Invest in Kids Act, whether it's going to include corporations or not. Many states do, and they donate to a scholarship management organization who then runs these scholarships and hands out scholarships to kids to be able to go to a private school, even religious schools, and even to other public schools in other districts. But it gives them that ability to go what best fits their need, and none of this money is state money, so it doesn't cost the state any money to actually provide this.
Yeah, when we talk about, people would be familiar with vouchers, this is not a voucher, because with the voucher we're using the state monies.
Correct.
And that's where a lot of times school districts will say that's taking money away from us and undercutting our financial pinning. This is not that, because it's private donation.
Correct. And yeah, vouchers, Illinois has what's called a Blaine Amendment, which is an amendment to prevent any money from going to religious schools, for state money from going to religious schools. So that is unconstitutional in Illinois, so you can't do a voucher. But a tax credit scholarship, like we said, is all private donations, and none of it runs through the state, and it allows anybody to help with education that wants to help with it. So it's different than a voucher because there's no state funds.
So why are we here at the state capitol if we're using private money? Why do you need the state?
Well, you need the state because the state needs to pass that tax credit. Right now, there are some private scholarships that go around and stuff, but they all just run through charitable donations. So the incentive for more people to actually just help fund education, the tax credit is a better incentive, because typically in most states it's a dollar for dollar credit for your tax liability.
And what, have you already talked to lawmakers on this, and what kind of reception are you getting?
Well, we actually sent them we did a little policy brief last week, just kind of outlining what tax credit scholarships are, what they do, how they work, how they've worked in other states, and sent that to multiple state reps here in Illinois. One of them has asked us to come and testify when they do a hearing on tax credit scholarships. So it's a popular idea. It's been moving around. There was actually an article just recently about Governor Rauner and Mike Madigan both interested in the idea of tax credit scholarships.
Let me go back to whether or not it hurts school districts. If the student leaves a district and goes to a private school, is there any diminishment of funding for that district?
No, not the way the tax credit scholarships work. They don't have a student to teach anymore.
But I mean, the way the state funding works for the district, are they paying based upon per pupil, or do they how do they assess how much money district ABC gets?
It's a very complicated formula. That's why you're having all the debate about it. But the way the formula works, there is some money that goes regardless, because there's the set cost, and then there is some per student funding based on the attendance at a given time in the district.
Right.
So there is some there, but all the local money stays. So in essence, you're actually increasing the per student funding if a student leaves, because you no longer have to educate that child, but you've still got all the other monies coming in because of the local funding that actually increases the average. It's a small increase, but it's an average. It's still that.
You wouldn't have, but that sounds like an arguable point. I mean, if the district loses some money, because, I mean, depending upon how much money is raised privately, and I want to get to that, but if, let's say we raised a boatload of money privately, and various districts had 1,000 or 2,000 kids leave, then it would have some economic impact on that.
Well, if you look at the studies, though, it hasn't. It's actually saved states money, so they have more money that they can put into education. They can increase the per student funding. It's actually saved from, since tax credit scholarships came in, the top 10 programs, which covers 93% of students around the country, has actually saved states $1.7 to $3.4 billion. Put in a per student funding, that's about $1,650 to right around $3,000 per student, and over time. So it's saving the states money that they can then use for increasing education or using other things. So there may not be a diminishment. It's up to the state what they do with that extra money they have from the savings.
Has this been tried in other states, and to what extent has it raised? What kind of money has it raised? Because if it only raises $100,000 or something, we're not really going to accomplish a lot.
No, every state that's done it, basically, they raise the money that they need typically within hours to a few days. Florida's the biggest. Florida has an auto escalation where if they hit 90%, it'll automatically increase by 20% the next year. They're now raising over $550 million for their tax credit scholarships, and they have over 100,000 students receiving those tax credit scholarships. They're by far the largest. Arizona's been the longest running, and they've had their tax credit scholarship for over 20 years now. So it's working in other states, and it's not diminishing the money going to education.
And I think you would argue, rather than having this debate about vouchers, which has been going on for decades, this is kind of a middle ground where we're using private funds. And yet, for those kids who are stuck in a underperforming school,
right,
and we have any number of those, especially often in the inner city,
yes,
that rather than just writing their future off, it's a rope to kind of give them a way out to go to some other school, I presume in their area, but it wouldn't necessarily have to be in their area.
It's up to them. I mean, it really is up to them. If they have the transportation, they could go further. It really is up to the parent at that point. But if you look at the nation's report cards or the NAEP scores, only 37% of fourth graders are proficient in math, and only 32% in reading. In math, in 8th grade. In reading, it's basically 35% are proficient in both 4th grade and 8th grade. So we're failing. Over 60% of our kids are not being proficient even by the time they get to 8th grade right now. So there's got to be a change, and that's why we advocate a lot, is focus on the student instead of focusing on the districts.
Is this the first effort by the Heartland Institute to have this tax credit passed in Illinois?
No, actually, back in the early 90s, there was actually the Illinois plan where they actually wrote up a whole consecutive plan about how to fund it. That was more based on education savings accounts, which is a little bit different than this. I think that included a little bit of tax credit scholarships, so it's something Heartland's been working on for decades here in Illinois.
An education saving account, the money would actually most likely come from the parent, right? And then where they would set it aside for Junior or Sally or whatever. But here, I mean, the problem with that might be that you have a parent that doesn't have any excess money to set aside.
Right.
Where here, you can get any number of people can donate 5, 10, or $1 million, I suppose.
Right. Well, some of the ESA plans that are the ones that are set up now actually include state money. So the state actually funds a personal account for the parent, then directs that for the education. So that does actually involve state money as well in those education savings accounts plan. And there's 6 states with education savings accounts plans now.
And how many with the tax credit plan that we're talking about?
17 states are using that already.
And for how long, and have we seen any results in the test scores of the state, of the students in those states?
Yes, Arizona's been the longest. They've been about 2 decades now. They've been using a tax credit scholarship. They also have an ESA. They have a wide range of school choice programs, and their results have increased dramatically. They're now battling Massachusetts for the top education state in the entire country now. Florida's starting to see it, especially with a lot of their programs are more geared towards special needs. And you've started to see how it's really helping the special needs kids in Florida, and several other states have started the same way.
When we say it saves the state's money, and I've just been around here to know people play games with numbers.
Yes.
Would we see that in actual, reflected in the state budget? When you, let's say it was $1 billion save, would we see that education funding went from $4 billion to $3 billion, just as an example?
Actually, probably not, because most likely what would happen is the state would continue to fund education at the same level they are now. Until you have a large amount of students that are actually doing that, it really isn't going to change the education budget. What it's going to do is allow them more flexibility to put more money and not be the drain on the revenue, trying to increase it as fast, is really the way it's worked in other states.
I see, and of course, then that would also address some of the things we often hear teachers, unions and all talk about, is the class size making them smaller. That would make the class size smaller. Right?
Yeah, it potentially does, yes.
So, right now, where we stand, you're here trying to get this, the lawmakers kind of up to speed on what the issues are, just as we're doing this interview. And how is it being received, and when would a bill be introduced to make this happen?
Well, I'm not sure the timing on how everything, I think it's going to come rather quickly here before long. And yeah, our goal is really to educate the legislators on how a tax credit scholarship works, the results in other states, what the impact, economic impact could be, what the impact on children would be, more so than trying to tell them this is how you design the program and this, you should pass this. We're not telling them that. We just want to educate them on best practices that what other states have seen the results and stuff in.
And lastly, the legislature, as everyone knows, is run by Democrats. Democrats in the Heartland Institute typically don't agree on things. What kind of reception are you getting from the Democratic leadership?
Actually, our Heartland is bipartisan around the country. Illinois is a little different than a lot of states, but we have bipartisan support around the country. We have an emerging issues forum. Illinois, I believe we have some members of our legislative forum are both Democrats and Republicans. Yes, we have more Republicans as members than Democrats, but it is bipartisan, and we do have Democrats that are on board and working with us at times and helping us, that we try to mutually work with them on issues that we agree with.
Yeah, no criticism intended, just a Heartland's more a free market kind of a thing.
Yes, we definitely are more free market, absolutely.
And for those who aren't financially literate, just briefly, what is the difference between a tax credit versus a tax deduction?
A tax deduction, you only get a percentage of that off on your taxes, so it comes off pre-tax. Basically, it's part of your calculating your tax liability. A tax credit comes after you've already calculated your tax liability, and it's typically a dollar for dollar. With the tax credit scholarship, some states limit that to 80%. It can never be more than your tax liability. They never give you back a refund on those, how most of them work. So, but it's after your tax liability is calculated, then it's basically a dollar for dollar credit off of your tax liability.
And what I would tell people, you can see, just to make this even a little simpler, if someone owes $1,000 in taxes and you're at the 20% tax bracket, I'm just making some numbers up for illustration purposes, your tax on $1,000 would be $200. Whereas if you got a tax credit, you could save the whole $1,000.
Correct.
Say dollar for dollar.
Right. If you had donated $200 to a scholarship management organization, that whole $200 would then be, your tax liability would go to zero.
Lennie Jarratt, we appreciate you joining.
Thank you, Terry.